welcome back, everybody. I hope you managed to have some lunch and also go and visit ISLA or the RMA for their sessions, and you're feeling refreshed and all of that. I've been told that we've got a lot more participants now on the seminar, so that's good news. I think a lot of those are coming from the US, where I believe, according to my phone at least, we're still waiting for a result. Although I think Trump claimed victory a little while ago. I saw, according to a headline, but I think that's a false claim as far as I can tell. Anyways, just a little bit of housekeeping. We're encouraging people, of course, throughout the day to go visit the sponsors in their booths. And just as a reminder and a little update for people who've joined us, if you click on the tab that says sponsors and virtual exhibitors, you will see another tab that says join virtual booth. In the networking breaks, please go and have a look. There's a lot of interesting stuff there, and our exhibitors are waiting for you. Anyways, on to the next session. So this morning was all about regulation, and we had all about technology in terms of how it was going to facilitate the demands of regulation in the business. This next session is about pure technology, and I think, well, it's entitled Blockchain in Securities Finance. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the day that when I was last involved in this business back in 2016 at the ISLA conference in Vienna, there was a session on blockchain. And I think, like a lot of people, I came away from that thinking, well, I've kind of got a vague understanding, I think, of what blockchain is, I think, as a non-technician. However, I've absolutely no idea about how this might get applied in practice, and particularly to the world of securities finance. Now, we move along 4 years, and I'm hoping that our panel session are going to help us out here. I think we're going to hear about a real-life implementation of blockchain, so I think it's all going to be very interesting. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Darren Crowther, who's Darren is the General Manager for Securities Finance and Collateral Management at Broadridge. So over to you, Darren. Thank you.
So firstly, good morning or good afternoon from where you are. Yeah, as Kevin said, we're going to take you through a number of use cases today as to how blockchain is used within securities finance today. So on the panel is firstly Matt Wolf. Matt is at the OCC. He's the VP for Business Development, and he's part of their current and future sort of tech refresh roadmap, and part of that has been movement into blockchain, and he'll talk a bit about that at a later stage. I've also got Duncan Johnson-West, who's part of Blockchain TP. He's the CEO and co-founder, and they've just gone live with a very interesting project at the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, introducing a securities lending blockchain platform. So again, something that's happening today. And finally, Matthew Phillips. Matt or Matthew, depending on how I feel today, is Head of Delivery at Trading Apps, and he's going to take us through really how blockchain can be used going forward as well, and the different uses and things that we can do within the industry to get the best out of this. So we're going to take you through those discussions. So to give you an idea on where we're kind of at, blockchain is, or DLT, distributed ledger technology, is something that's been used for a while. A number of years within our industry. It's used actively today, it'll be used tomorrow, and it will certainly be used in the future. We were talking prior to this, and there was a graphic that really interested to us that I'll share on my LinkedIn after this seminar. And it was a graphic that was created by a gentleman called Andy Martin, who is the head of blockchain at IBM. And there are at least 40 uses of blockchain already in the world. There are 20 different business networks. There's 11 platforms, including AWS, Amazon, IBM, and Oracle, all doing blockchain technology solutions. And there's 9 different ways of doing it, at least. So it's not new anymore. It's something that's here. Within our industry, there are a number of different initiatives at different stages. So HQLAX, which we'll be talking about later in one of the later seminars, have been live for a number of months around a DLT securities lending platform. And the OCC partnered up with a company called Axion, who have done the same. Duncan's group have partnered up with the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, again, to introduce something at the exchange level. Broadridge have been working for a while on a DLT repo solution. Again, that's gone through different phases and is live with some clients. There are other instances. The Malaysian Stock Exchange have done a proof of concept. The BME, the Spanish Stock Exchange, have done transactions with collateral. So it's all things that are happening now. And there are probably two parts of what I've said that are really important to keep in mind. Blockchain or DLT is a team sport. When there's two people involved, that's great. When there's many people involved, that's where it gets its real network value from. And that's why places like Tel Aviv and the OCC and some of the other exchanges have really pushed for this, because they can provide that network effect. The other thing, and this is where Matt's going to talk about as well, Matt Phillips is going to talk about, is blockchain isn't about a big bang. There's a gradual incremental change that can be done as part of DLT. And we're going to talk about how what you could do with that using some real use cases. So I hope that just sets the scene for what we're going to talk about. So Matt, I'm firstly going to hand over to you to allow you to talk a bit about what's happening with the OCC.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Darren. Glad to be here today. Thanks to everybody. So OCC, we started looking at blockchain back in 2015. At the time, it was very nascent, and it was sort of more of, we pulled together a team to sort of stay aware and identify some triggers for further investment. So our plan was, we looked across OCC's product set and really felt that stock loan, as opposed to options, as well as futures trading and clearing, stock loan was the better use case possibly for blockchain. So we put together a proof of concept sort of sketch, and shopped it around and talked to different vendors for a few years to try and stay abreast of what was happening and monitor some of those investment triggers. Those were things like major clients and banks doing implementations, things like fiat currency moving on chains, digitizing securities. And so as we saw these triggers start to be tripped over the last few years, they were signals to us to really start looking at this more and more closely. And then about 2 years ago, OCC set about a process of replacing our entire technology stack from our legacy platform that we have today. And we looked at both traditional technology, building it versus buying it, as well as blockchain, and decided to explore it further and did a proof of concept and shopped that with our clients and various other industry participants, and got really positive feedback. And it was able to meet all of the non-functional criteria that was critical for systemically important financial market utility like OCC to have. And so we ended up selecting Axani as our partner to build out this new stock loan clearing platform. We're about midway through development, should be done July of next year, and then go live with our entire technology refresh sometime in 2022.
So what's been the challenges, Matt, that you've seen with either you or your clients there with the process so far?
So there was definitely a lot of challenges internally at first to go through and raise our internal level of understanding about blockchain, dispel a lot of myths, look at it really, really closely from a security perspective, make sure that all of our tools that we use for security testing can work on this new system, and thinking very closely about how does the various components of this new system, which is more modular in nature. So for example, we have a shared reference data service, which is not in the stock loan DLT platform. So how do you interface that data in? And we have to feed the data about stock loan contracts into our margining engines. So how do we synchronize out of the blockchain into these more traditional based systems? So that was definitely a challenge. And then finally, I think there was a widespread belief that everybody must engage in the network. And that's not actually true. It's more optional. You can choose to take a node, or you can choose to continue to receive the same messaging that you do today. So those are definitely some challenges that we had to go through and continue to work through.
And what's been the adoption from the clients? Like, how has that adoption come over time? How have you worked with them to do that?
So we're still, we should be feature complete next year, and then testing through late next year and into 2022. And that'll be the point where clients can actually take a node in a testing environment and consider whether they want to engage with the network natively through a node, or in a more traditional manner using like fixed ML messages.
Where do you think you're going to get to for one or the other as a percentage? Will it be 50-50 or?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I mentioned after we did our proof of concept, we went and did sort of a dog and pony demo across the street. And we followed up that a series of meetings using a consulting company to do an anonymous survey of participants that had seen the demo. And one of the questions was, how likely are you to utilize a DLT-based system if offered by OCC? And I'm trying to remember the exact numbers in my head. 55% said extremely likely, and 35% said very likely. So there's very, very clear interest from many, many different participants. And that poll gave us good confidence that there is appetite and desire for this. So we'll see once it's ready for people to test and take note.
Great, thanks, Matt. Duncan, pivoting over to you. I know you've got a great story with what you've been doing with Tel Aviv, and I'll let you maybe share that, and then we can drill into some of the finer details.
Thank you. And actually, it's really interesting listening to what Matt just said, because the backstory, if you will, to the work that the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange has done in this arena started around the same kind of time. So in interest of full disclosure, we did not develop the application. So our focus as a company is really on enabling somebody to take a proof of concept and roll it forward into production, and obviously provide all of the support that you need once you're in production. So the genesis, which in blockchain terms has a very significant meaning, but that's, sorry, silly joke, but the genesis of the idea was really around, there's an incubator in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange itself in the building called The Floor. And so the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange brought together Accenture and Intel to really brainstorm doing a blockchain-based application. And they chose securities lending. And the reason they chose securities lending is, unlike perhaps other more mature markets, it's not that well serviced in Israel. So what I mean by that is it's done on a ad hoc bilateral basis, where there's obviously securities lending going on, but there's no actual lending pool per se. So really what they thought was, well, if we're going to do something, let's build a business case to create something of real value. And so creating a securities lending market in Israel was chosen. And they elected to use something called Hyperledger Sawtooth, which is one of a number of different DLT technologies that are available. Happens to be one that Intel contributed to the Hyperledger Foundation. So the Hyperledger Foundation is part of the Linux Foundation, which, in case you don't know, is the governance organization that looks after Linux. And so what happened was they got some way down the track with that. And then Intel brought us into the discussion to really look at how could they take this forward and how could they make it production grade, production ready. And this is something to really think about when you're doing these projects, because the technologies themselves are somewhat complex. Of course, we're all smart, we have smart people in teams and so on, but there's a point you reach where as a business you go, do I want to maintain this, particularly if it's an open source software stack, do I want to be responsible for that? Do I want to be responsible for ensuring that that's maintained over considerable lengths of time potentially? Because if we're successful, which I believe we all will be, these networks are going to be around for as long as things like Swift. So so that's the thing to bear in mind here. So we've been working with the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange for the past year or so, and things got serious earlier this year, really helping them set up the infrastructure to roll out the platform, which indeed, as you said, happened earlier this week. As with all these things, and again, referencing what Matt was saying, it's not like everybody is suddenly hosting a node on the network. And so, there are alternate paths in order to get onto the system. So there is a conventional path, as you'd expect. Very similar, Matt, to what you were saying. But there are incentives in place to encourage you, let's call it, to host one or more nodes. And so it's running on a permissioned network. That means that governance is tightly controlled in terms of who joins the party. And in the case of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, there's a well-defined set of participants that are entitled to actually help create this lending pool and then operate this on behalf of their own clients. So one of the incentives is if you actually host a node, or in this case, a small cluster to contribute to the overall network, then you get the benefits of integration into your own back office direct, rather than through the conventional sort of APIs. And so that's an interesting way of trying to incentivize people in the right way, of course, to actually look to adopt the new technology. So make it something that adds value. So not just in terms of building out a new market, which of course is very significant for TASE, particularly now that they are themselves quoted on the TASE. So TASE has gone through that classic journey of being a utility, so not for profit, owned by its participants, to then restructuring itself from a capitalization point of view so that it could, in theory, operate for profit. And then logical conclusion of that was then IPOing last summer. So in the context of now being, or wanting to blaze a trail, this was a great project that delivered real value, creating a new market which was definitely needed, and which we think over time will invigorate stock lending in Israel itself, and ultimately could be opened out beyond just the Israeli sort of market. So giving market access to other participants over time. So it's live, but it's early. And now, of course, it's galvanizing people to actually sort of really help create liquidity. But I think it's a good, well thought through process. And I think the key is, a blockchain is not just for Christmas, if you'll excuse the pun, or pick your favorite religious or pagan festival, but it's something that needs to be looked after over the long term. So maintained, upgraded, and so on. And so that's really where we see ourselves and companies like ourselves fitting in. It's ensuring that the technology enables innovation.
And that model that was adopted there, is that a cookie cutter type model where it could then be transposed to other exchanges or other organizations, or is it always just tailored to suit?
So the core infrastructure is, of course, middleware. Therefore, that's entirely portable and reusable. There is an open question as to whether or if what they've done could be packaged and offered to other exchanges and so on. We're seeing that happen in NASDAQ, for example, where NASDAQ have created a digital asset suite, which is a set of tools essentially that allows people to experiment with these technologies, but actually doing so at a higher level of abstraction. So I think what's happened over the last 2-3 years since that project started is the notion of working with smart contracts. So DAML from Digital Asset, for example, which I know Broadridge is also working with, or if it's Axoni, it's Axlang, if it's Symbian, it's SymPL. There's a number of these smart contract languages which enable you to actually raise the level of debate and model these business processes, I think, in a way that will ultimately make them more reusable.
Great, thanks. And Matt, I know you've thought a lot, and we've talked a lot about how blockchain can be used within securities lending, securities financing more and more. Just want to give us your thoughts there and how you see things evolving.
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Darren. So I think there's really two main use cases in securities finance. So the first is around the transfer of title. So you've probably all heard of this concept of a digital twin or tokenized assets. So and we're seeing this in the HQLAX model, where you actually have the physical security is tokenized, and excuse me, and the transfer of ownership of that happens in the blockchain. So as Duncan mentioned, you have permissioned governance around it. So you know who is in the party and who you're transferring the assets to. And of course that has a lot of benefits around liquidity. You're obviously avoiding physical settlement of those, and you have reduction in like intraday exposure and risk on that side. So that's a very obvious one. I think you see a lot of that in the supply chain industries where they you have assets moving between the manufacturers and then the actual companies that use those. So that's traditionally one of the big uses. The other one is really what a blockchain or a DLT, because blockchain just is an implementation of DLT, is what it distills down to. And essentially it's a shared database. It's a shared database that, although you have nodes where you have everybody has a copy of it, effectively you've got a logical shared database between you, and that database can only be updated with consensus, and that's both technical consensus. So you can't propose to do things on there that don't fit the pattern, don't fit the data model. And then you also have business consensus or business validation, where the participants have to agree those changes. And so in that way, you create this single version of the truth that both or all participants agree is the golden record. So at TA, we've been looking at we've been doing a lot of work in AWS recently for our hosted platform, and one of the things that we're also looking in there is a network or a connectivity tool, and there'll be the usual stuff on there, locates and rate negotiation, that kind of thing, messaging, but also in AWS, it's been mentioned that there is so much technology and tools that can be used. The other platforms surprise them as well, but you can literally spin up networks, and so this has really got us thinking about, right, okay, so how could we use those for our clients? And there's a lot of data that can be shared into instrument static prices, rates, these kinds of things, that operational data. But I think if we look ahead to what could be the end goal, or the ultimate compelling proposition, is when we talk about stock loan contracts. I mean, if we look at the evidence, you agree a single loan between you. That's like a logical thing, the contract, and then you then book two representations of that, and you then spend your lives trying to keep those two things in sync across the two different silos, and really we go to town. It's not like a stock loan contract goes and sits in a drawer somewhere and gets renewed once a year. It literally can change every single day, and obviously, you know, we all know rate changes, marks, whatever. And even if we get a contract that's all neat and tidy, we then say not so fast, and we do backdated changes on them as well. And really, you know, what it boils down to is at the end of every month, you've got to make sure that that contract is economically and from a chronology point of view, exactly matching what your counterparty has in order to agree that final thing. And we've got thousands of trades, so we have some fantastic reconciliation tools already that you know, widely used and really, you know, bring the market together. I think it's treatment of the symptoms and not the root cause. Now, I'm not saying that blockchain DLT is the panacea. We will have exactly the same issues that we've always had. You know, the integration with books and record systems, standardization of data, and one of the more recent implementations was the Spunter implementation between the Italian banks reconciliation service that was built on Corda, which is one of the other big platforms. So they the lady that was spearheading that said that the issue wasn't the technology. The challenge was never the technology. It was investment. It was education of getting everybody used to it. But data standardization again, you know, so we've got those things. So you can see why having a golden source or a golden record of a contract that any changes to that are agreed between the parties and then reflected back into the books and record systems. You can see why it's a very compelling proposition, and it doesn't stop there. It's like, right, once you have that clean data, when you've got that data that can be used, that you can build services on top of it. So centralized billing engines, settlement engines, and then what other types of data can you share? So corporate action data, instrument static, these kind of things. You can see where, right, okay, if we take a step back and say, what is blockchain? You can see why the securities finance in particular, it was a problem looking for a solution. Yeah, so I think that's the basis of where I think securities finance can really benefit from this technology.
And then maybe an open question for me, just when you said something there, it occurred to me, the common domain model that ISLA are pushing for.
Yeah, Adrian was talking about it earlier.
Yeah, so this would benefit you believe the
yeah. Absolutely, it's a partnership made in heaven, that one. It's just like, right, okay, so you basically got your requirements. You know, what do you need to build? Here you go, build one of these. And I think, you know, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so that becomes your smart data contract in a way, is it? That's the main model.
That becomes your network design and the applications that you then run on top of your nodes. Yeah, those are the business rules that you need to put in place.
I think the important thing about that work though with ISDA and the common domain model is digital asset have, you know, created a set of DAML contracts that actually represent that. And rather than each of us trying to interpret those rules in our own way, we can use the canonical smart contract and run that wherever it needs to be run. And so this is going beyond just standards around data, it is standards around the contracts themselves. Because, you know, I remember back in the old days, good or bad, define as you wish, but you know, working with things like fixed, then FPML and so on, but they always lacked the ability to really model the entire life cycle. And I think, you know, so everybody then took the basic sort of principles and have tried to implement them themselves. Whereas with the smart contract, you actually have a standard implementation of the business logic as well.
Yeah.
So I think that is a genuine step forward.
And one thing that I see quite often with what we do within Broadridge is part of technology innovation needs business practice change as well. It's not just about getting the system to work with how people work today, but getting them to change their business processes and practices. Do you, like Matt Wolf and Duncan, have you seen that with the work that you've done, that you've had to try to change the way the business is done to improve it? Or because earlier I think Mark Byrne in one of the SFTR discussions had raised the point of the expectation was that business practice would change to fit SFTR, but that actually didn't happen. So they were shoehorning an old practice into a new data model, let's just say. Do you see that being different with DLT?
So Matt, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Most definitely. So right now, the way our stock loan program operates is after a lender and borrower negotiate a loan, they submit it for settlement at DTC. Once that delivery versus payment transaction settles, it then flows to OCC to determine whether we'll step in and become the lender to the borrower and borrower to lender through novation. And then, as Matthew mentioned, both lender and borrower and OCC now have, there's 3 records of this loan contract. And we have this daily process of trying to reconcile and see, do we all agree on the current state of it? And often, that is, that's wrong a lot of the time. So when we talk to participants, they said their greatest pain points were errors caused by these 3 different versions of the contract, the prevalence of those, the amount of manual processing time to try and reconcile those differences on a daily basis, and the escalating costs of just simply that daily reconciliation of ensuring that all 3 records are in balance. And so what we're doing is essentially attacking the problem from 2 sides. Under our new stock loan program, we'll require certain types of transactions to be affirmed by the parties prior to settlement being affected, or say on a re-rate, the rate on the contract being changed. And so on the front end, we're helping to reduce the number of errors through this affirmation process before the fact instead of after the fact. And then through the DLT platform, as soon as those contract changes or the settlement occurs, the record of that is then automatically in near real time synchronized to the participants. So, over time, there doesn't need to be these 3 different records. We're making sure that the one record is correct and that everybody is agreeing and working off of that shared copy of the record.
All right, okay. And then I guess one thing that keeps coming back to me is there's a lot of legacy platforms out there, or platforms that maybe don't have the native capability to connect up to a DLT platform. So how do we see that change adopting? Is it can you do it incrementally? Is it stuff that you need to build a new platform for? Like how do you see that working?
So both are possible. I mean, there are some, and obviously the OCC is doing a major refresh, and the Australian Stock Exchange announced the same with CHESS a few years ago, and that's an ongoing multi-year project. But I think you can also use it in conjunction with existing systems. So it's not a case of you have to have a huge change management program in order to introduce the technology in the first place. And it's important to understand that both blockchain or DLTs more generally and smart contracts are layers within a stack and need themselves to actually integrate. And so the integration then becomes very much the similar integration that everyone's familiar with around things like service bus architectures. So in that sense, it's not new, which is good. It's the capability and the elimination, the potential is the elimination of error, of course, and the fact that these contracts work in lockstep so that, you know, everyone is aware of what's going on, subject, of course, to, you know, any rules and regs around who can see what. So what are your roles and responsibilities? Are you a participant per se, or are you an observer? All of that stuff needs to be taken care of. But I think it would be, it's one of those interesting things where long term, of course, there will be a huge amount of re-engineering, but I wouldn't want people to think that you have to always have a greenfield opportunity or a major undertaking like, okay, it's 15 years since we did this last time, right? Okay, off we go. You know, these large projects. I think that, you know, we should make it clear to people that you can do this incrementally as well. So it's a case of picking some particular area, and I'm sure Matthew, working at trading apps and running BD for them, has plenty of examples of this, where can I improve a process? Can I underwrite an existing process? And underwrite meaning literally, can I support it by using technologies like DLT versus having to rewrite everything, which is a terrible thing to have to go into a business and say, because everyone will laugh at you and say, okay, sure, that's like having, okay, we finally decided we're going to create the ultimate reference data project that will, you know, bring all reference data in the bank together. Well, yeah, good luck. You know, I mean,
yeah, how many times has that been tried? But
oh, many.
Yeah, I mean, and it does, as you say, it doesn't need to be big bang. It's you can start off with trying to reconcile a single trade between two participants, and you know, you don't need to solve for SFTR. As a starting point, you know, 160 fields, really you just need to solve for the what is the economic reality of that trade. What are the 5, 6, 10 fields that you need to match them in the first place, and you work from there. And literally you could switch on, you know, right, okay, I only want to do this counterparty, I only want to do this market, I only want to do this selection of trades that have been problematic in the past, and bring it on that way, and then just reflect that agreed trade back into your silo. So you don't need to take the whole thing out to make a start, but you will get value from making a start.
I think also, I can just add one thing, which is that all of the conversations we're having and use cases we talk about here, generally speaking, are multi-party. And I think that's, you know, that's really the core value. Not to say that it won't work within an enterprise. If you have a complex enterprise, you know, effectively it is a collection of multiple parties. But I think, you know, what we're seeing, and obviously, is when people like the OCC embrace it, you know, they are, or Broadridge or anybody like that. Basically, this is setting out a way of integrating multiple parties in a more efficient and streamlined process. So I think that's the thing I would also look for, is just as you said, Matthew, you know, then we're always looking for things where there are multiple participants. That's really where we deliver the most value.
Yeah, and if I could just elaborate a bit further on the integration point. In our case, if a participant does choose to take a node, there's two different paradigms that you can use to integrate. One is that every change that you're privy to on the ledger, the node will automatically generate an event-based message, which in our case, we're generally using Kafka to transmit those intermittent event-based changes. But there's also a tool that Axoni has called AxeDB, which keeps a continuously synchronized database. In our case, we're using Postgres, but there's other alternatives there that you can use. And so I do think that as participants start to experiment with the network, what they'll likely do is take the node and have essentially two copies of their contracts, one that's synchronized from OCC's record and one that's maintained from their traditional, and do a continual reconciliation between the two to see you know, how close are we? And then eventually start to decouple things off of the old legacy one that requires manual processing and start to connect them into the synchronized version of the copy of the records.
That's interesting, because that pattern, which I think generically is called DB sync, is available pretty much on every ledger, because it makes the data much easier to work with, while always saying, of course, ultimate source of truth is still the ledger, but you're not trying to query the ledger in real time. And the event streams, that's going to be huge, I think, because we're part of the Interwork Alliance, which is a terrible name for a very good organization. I guess we've run out of good names now, but essentially it's now inherited the token taxonomy framework and the work that was going on there. And it's overlaid that with something called the Interwork framework, which is looking at, you know, standards around contracts and clauses and so on. And then the bit that we're involved in and I'm chair of is the analytics framework, which is what can we derive from all of the above, or all of the below, I should say. And that event stream is something that we're all used to consuming in financial services, many other industries besides. So I think that's essential as well. I totally agree.
Yeah, and Kevin joining as our signal to almost end. But there's one question that's come up a few times online for the questions, and Matt, I'm going to target this at you. Apologies. The question is really simple, and I'm paraphrasing based on some of them, is, will DLT make me money or save me money?
It will, in the near term, save you money. And over time, as we start to shift from just synchronizing data and eliminating cost, then we can start to incorporate better processes, better data availability, better transparency, better access to clients and vendors. And as we start to even then further look at tokenization of securities, that's when you can start to actually make money off the chain, or rather do trading in different ways, more effective ways, better management of your rates to optimize your return.
And that's starting to happen with things like securitized token offerings, and the ability to, you know, digitize. The digitization of everything is kind of the theme that's there in the future, I guess.
And there's a whole raft of products that we haven't even thought of yet that are going to make money. So yeah, I mean, when the web was invented, Amazon didn't know they'd be doing what they were doing. So it's that kind of shift in the paradigm.
Yeah, and that's probably a good way to end. So going to save money in the short term and make money in the long term. That's what I like. So a very Scottish attitude to the world. So thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for everyone who's listened and contributed to the questions as well. I hope you found it useful. I hope it's given you a little bit interesting to explore it more. And I look forward to the next session, which will be starting shortly. So thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.